Ralph, are you still in prison?
Where do you think I got this suit? In Gimbel's basement? Of course I'm still in prison. You know, now I know how you feel when you sing a song.
How?
Behind a few bars and can't find the key.
Hi-ho, and welcome once again to a feat of lunatic daring, the most sensational, inspirational, celebrational, muppetational podcast about Jim Henson and his Muppets. My name is Chad. I'm here with my co-host Nick Jackson. How is the world of Nick Jackson?
I mean, the sky isn't orange anymore, if I wanted to date this. But outside of that, it's very interesting.
For people, Nick lives in San Francisco, and they've had a weird couple of days.
Yeah, it's down to like smokestack hazy now, so hopefully that's a good sign. But yesterday it was full on orange. Yeah,
I saw pictures, and I'm not gonna lie to you. Like, as much as I felt bad for my friends, I was also somewhat relieved to not be there anymore. But I had some survivor's guilt over it.
Well, I mean, don't feel too bad. I had to go into the office, which was awful, but it's down on Market Street, and there was this guy who was playing Careless Whisper, and it seemed weirdly ominous in context.
Did you see the video footage of someone took the music from Blade Runner 2049 and put it over shots of San Francisco?
No, but I could imagine that. Everyone was
and
either
it
saying
works.
It would, yeah. Like, we were either on Mars or in Blade Runner, but for whatever reason, my mind went to, like, old anime movies from the 80s.
Okay, so now that we've dated this to September of 2020, this is a feat of lunatic daring. We talk about Jim Henson and the Muppets. If you want to know any more about that, go back and watch our preview episode. And of course, you can watch our first episode as well. Before we get started, I'd like to point out, as we have to, our social media. Check us out. It's at Lunatic Daring on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. And lunaticdaring.com, which I've been doing some work on, which is our website that will have not only a page of links for you to watch along with us if that's what you want to do, but it also has our sources, our bibliography, so you can see where we're getting our information. And again, if you'd like to read along, that would be great. As much as we'd like to sit here and chat, that's not what we're here to do. We're here to tell a story. Should we get back into it?
Let's go.
The first time you walk into a convention as a child, be it for comic books or Doctor Who or people who really dig Rubik's Cubes, you feel this profound revelation of belonging. Having a niche hobby, the one nobody in your family understands, one that makes it difficult for you to carry on normal conversations with people who don't want to talk about the history of the Dominion War, can be lonely. Message boards and Discord channels are fine, but are there real people out there like you? The floor of a con reveals that yes, there are, and there are far more of you than you ever thought. As Nick Hornsby wrote, it's what you like, not what you are like, that matters. I can't even guess what was more popular in 1960, puppets or comic books, but since neither were exactly mainstream pursuits, I'm going to guess it was no different when Jim Henson arrived at the 1960 Puppeteers Convention in Detroit, Michigan. He had piled Jane and their 8-week-old daughter Lisa in the roles for a 500-mile trip. Jim, now that he had embraced puppetry fully, was looking forward to being in a building surrounded by his peers. He had been the only fish in the DC pond, so it must have felt nice just to get out to sea, as he watched puppetry exhibitions from around the world, featuring techniques both ancient and cutting edge. He also met some people, like Bert Tillstrom, creator of Kukla, Fran, and Ollie, and one of the most revered puppeteers in the world. They became fast friends, and Tillstrom introduced Jim to Don Saleen, his master puppet builder who had worked on Kukla, as well as shows like Howdy Doody and movies like The Time Machine. He had just finished doing a small puppet performance in the latest Elvis Presley vehicle, G.I. Blues. Tillstrom was instantly taken with Henson, in whom he saw a kindred spirit, someone who, even at a convention full of puppet people, stood out as someone who really knew what he was talking about. Tillstrom knew talent when he saw it. He also knew Jim was going to be big, bigger than anyone else in that room, and that he was going to need representation. William Morris agent Bernie Brillstein already repped one puppeteer and really didn't want another, but he trusted Bert Tillstrom.
So my office was on the 26th floor at the time. And in walked, it's funny, it's like a through line of Jesus. It is, because Jim Henson, bearded, skinny, came in carrying a box, and inside were all the puppets. But it wasn't all the ones that came on Sesame Street. It was the original group. And don't ask me why again. Instinct. He made me laugh. I said, oh my God. Now, with that, Harry Calshine. I said, excuse me, Jim, one of my bosses is on the phone. He had a very high-pitched voice, Harry, and he said, Bernie, have you ever heard about the Muppets? I said, heard about them, I just signed them.
However, the most fortunate meeting at the 1960 convention was the least interesting on the surface. Jim became friendly with Mike and Frances Osnowitz, European immigrants and puppet enthusiasts from Oakland, California. Jim liked them both and they were talented performers, but all they wanted to talk about was their teenage son. Jim just had to meet their boy, Frank.
Jane Henson was very pregnant when she and Jim made the drive to Asilomar, California for the 1961 convention. She had already made the decision to step down from performing full-time with the Muppets, to retire after the birth of the next girl, whom they'd named Cheryl. Muppets Inc. was her company too, and she stayed involved for years to come. But it was time to be home and raise a family. Not much is said about Jane Neville Henson as a performer. She had been so integral in establishing the look, style, and methods that had formed the Muppets. However, because nearly every episode of Sam and Friends is lost to us due to the nature of live television, lost with them is Jane's on-screen career. But for 6 years, she had stood toe-to-toe with one of the best to ever do it. Had probably even taught him a thing or two. There's no reason to believe Jane couldn't have become one of the premier Muppet performers if she had carried on. But she had different priorities now, and at the end of the day, she also knew the Muppets were Jim's. She had been with him every step of the way, but it had been his vision, his drive, that had brought them success. Jim is totally a natural leader, and I am absolutely a follower, Jane would say. She hadn't even blinked when the deal for Muppets Inc. had split the company 60-40 in Jim's favor. She was done. Jim had big plans, and they were only getting bigger. With his literal right-hand woman out of the picture, Jim was going to need some help. Luckily, help was exactly what was waiting for him in Pacific Grove.
At Asilomar, Jim reconnected with the Osnowitzes, who were pleased that the convention was in state that year because it had allowed their son to attend. Frank Osnowitz, 17 and still in high school, had come to the convention with his friend Jerry to perform a puppet show Jerry had written. Frank had heard of the Muppets, but not Jim himself, and the soft-spoken giant made an impression. Quote, he was this very quiet, shy guy who did these absolutely fucking amazing puppets that were totally brand new and fresh and had never been done before. End quote. Pardon Frank's French. Despite what either party wanted, though, there was no way Frank could come work for Muppets Inc. while he was still in high school. His parents supported him, but not that much. So he recommended Jim take a look at his friend Jerry Jewell, an experienced puppeteer from Minnesota who had made his bones doing local TV in San Jose.
The final episode of Sam and Friends aired Friday, December 15th, 1961, at 11:25 p.m. Cheryl had arrived, so Jane had stepped down, and Jerry Jewell had replaced her as Jim's scene partner. The show ended appropriately enough, with chaos. There's no way to currently view this episode, although footage of it may exist in the Henson archive. So, for a summary, I'll just quote the good people at the Muppet Wiki. Kermit sings a song, then discusses the end of the series with Harry, who blows up all the scenery and equipment because they won't need it anymore. While Sam and Friends still had plenty of fans sad to see it go, Jim Henson was not one of them. It was time to move forward. And forward led him to Atlanta, where he and Muppets Inc., Jane, Bobby Payne, and Jerry Jewell would film what was sure to become a timeless children's classic, passed down for generations, cherished by all. The Tales of the Tinker D?
So, Nick, I'm going to assume, like all children of a certain age, that you grew up loving the land of Tinkerdy.
That's a bold assumption. I don't think I'd heard of it before.
I don't think anybody's heard of it.
Yeah, I was about to say, it's one of the less lonely I haven't heard of that before is that I've experienced.
Tinkerdy was a pilot. You know, Henson had been making Salmon Fronts for a while, and he wanted to take his stab at a half-hour television show. And this was in 1962, and he was basically going to be trying this for the next, 14 years?
Yeah, more or less. And you can see the early DNA of it in the episode as well. Like, it has less in common with the Muppet Show than it would with something like Fraggle Rock or even possibly Sesame Street to a degree.
For all of those out there who haven't seen Tales of Tinkerdy or didn't grow up, gather around the TV set with your family every Christmas to watch it. It is, how to explain it? It's a fairy tale, I guess. It's a fairy tale story. It's about a king named King Goshposh, whose daughter, the lovely Princess Gwendolina, fair-haired beauty for whose love every knight in the kingdom would surely risk his head. It also features a very kind of early Muppet favorite character of Tamalina Grindelwald, who's the witch in this, and a character named Kermit.
He's effectively kind of like a chorus for it. I mean, he's playing a minstrel, but his role, because he disappears for most of the action of the pilot, and then he comes back at the end. He's there in the beginning, and
he pops up in the middle a little bit. But yeah, he's the singing... well, hold on. Let me give you an example of Kermit. Kermit does not say a word in this that is not sung.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of like he's in a Sondheim production. But let me go ahead real quick. I'm going to play a little, just so you can hear kind of what Kermit's up to this time.
Your very wish is my command. Before the king I humbly stand. Have you finished your ballad to the lovely Princess Gwendolinda? Fair-haired beauty for whose love every knight in the kingdom would gladly risk his head. Yeah, that one. Have you finished writing the ballad? I have cogitated, correlated, syncopated, and related, orchestrated, and created songs to please the king. Does that mean you finished? I have finished. Well, let's hear 'em. It is the prince's date of birth. Let bells ring out the news. We'll celebrate with joy and mirth and a party, I suppose. What was that last word? Suppose, your highness. Out! Out!
I love two things about that clip. One, the footsteps, because they're using these puppets, they do everything they can with sound to make it sound like they have feet. Like everywhere they go, whenever Kermit comes anywhere, you hear that clomping feet, which I thought was interesting. It was very much a way for them to try to simulate them actually being people. And then also suppose. I love a good bad rhyme. I'm going to say it up front. I like this one.
I'm somewhere in the middle with it. One of the things that I thought was really clever was the inclusion of the ogre, because the entire point of that character is just to provide perspective. Because you just, like, you see a guy's hairy feet somewhere, and like the rest of him is somewhere off frame, or like his arms will come in, which was, I don't think other puppeteers would have been doing something like that at that point in time, where you just play with scale that way. The closet gag was entirely overdone, but
yes, yeah. The closet bit is I really like the beginning. I mean, this is basically a heist movie, right? The king is having a party for his daughter, and the only person he didn't invite was Tamalina Grindelwald, the witchest witch of them all. And at first you think she's just kind of jealous because she hasn't been invited, but then you realize that she really just wants to come steal all the presents.
I think it was more directly a play on the Sleeping Beauty scenario, where they just didn't invite one of them and it threw everything else back, except rather than bestowing a curse, she just wanted to steal things. There's a heavy focus on her trying to give the king a chance to remedy his mistake. Yeah. Like, I noticed that I didn't get an invite. Clearly you meant to invite me. You should do something about that.
I love that no matter how evil... I love characters that no matter how evil still care about etiquette.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the giant's like, well, why can't we just go anyway? She's like, haven't you heard of manners? We weren't invited.
I will avoid going on a huge fairy tale tangent, but that makes sense in context.
By the way, you mentioned Charlie. Do you know who played Charlie the Ogre?
Assuming it was Jim.
Yeah, those are Jim's legs. Yeah, those are Jim's legs. Yeah.
Say, Jim's known for being pretty tall, so that would make sense.
Something to be, to note, a couple things to note about this. It was directed by a guy named Carl Dagan, which I can't find much about. Bob Payne, who had taken over on Sam and Friends during Jim's hiatus to Europe. And Jane Henson, although she had technically retired at that point from Sam and Friends, was one of the puppeteers on this show. So this was kind of an all hands on deck. And of course, Jerry Jewell as well. I believe he played Tammy. I believe he played the witch. Jerry said, it was really just a half hour of one-line jokes. We'd done those kind of gags before on Sam and Friends, but this was the first time we'd stretched it to fill 30 minutes. And that's what's really important about this, right? This is the first attempt at a 30-minute, what we would consider a proper television show.
Yeah, I think surrounding this, mostly when you saw the Muppets, they were only there, they weren't going to be there for more than 10 minutes at a time, and even 10 minutes was unusual.
Well, and they were doing sketches, right? They at this point they were doing Sam and Friends, they had done and were still doing their commercials. And they had done guest appearances on many talk shows. But all of those are skits and sketches and little pieces. This is them telling a story. This is really the first time. I mean, Jerry Jewell and Jim wrote this together, and it's the first time that they tried to tell a narrative, which I find that notable. I also think it's very funny. King Goshposh is a character that we will see again.
Absolutely.
Can you come up with any idea why I didn't? Because this was supposed to be the pilot for a regular Muppet television show where I guess every week it would be these characters in another adventure.
It's hard to say because I have to keep in mind that the expectations watching television were different then, right?
Yeah.
We will come to the point that I would want to compare this to in just a little bit, but the thing that sticks out to me is it's something, I say this acknowledging Jim Henson as one of my heroes, it's something that you would see on in the background and then look back at once in a while. It doesn't compel in the same way. You've got a very solid want line with the witch, and the king has the whole dilemma about having a bunch of sandwiches that he's got to figure out what to do with.
67,000 peanut butter sandwiches.
And they do tie that into a pretty funny bow at the end, with that being the witch's punishment is that she just has to deal with that problem. But it's not one of their more compelling works, and I don't think it necessarily would have been seen as compelling at the time. Because that, we mentioned briefly the closet bit. Everyone keeps going back to the same closet to try to solve a problem that isn't fully realized. And you mentioned that it was a heist earlier, but the plan, like, even if it is a kid's show, there's no through line to the plan. There's just a desire to steal the gifts, which they kind of do, but
yeah, you're not watching this for the airtight plotting or the deep story beats. But you're right. It does not hold together. I guess it technically holds together as a story. There's a beginning, a middle, and an end.
It doesn't really cohere, though.
No, and it just isn't. It isn't particularly inspired. It feels like it's instead of, because remember he had been working on, since his trip to Europe, he had the idea of doing a Hansel and Gretel production. Mm-hmm. And I think some of the stuff from that worked its way into here. But this feels like, you'll see later on when they do fairy tales, they tend to base them on classical fairy tales. Mm-hmm. This is not an existing property. This is not him adapting some kid's book. This is just something they just made up as a fairy tale world. And so because of that, I think it feels shallow. Mm. The world isn't especially well built. I don't think they intended to, but it's just a play. It's like a 30-minute play of people making bad jokes.
Yeah.
And some good jokes. When I say I enjoy it, I don't enjoy it because I think I'm on the edge of my seat to see what's going to happen to the witch. I enjoy it because I think the king is funny. And it was a great line where he orders a birthday cake with 357 layers or whatever it is. And it shows up with that many candles instead. And he has a fantastic line where he says,
"That doesn't look like a birthday cake. It looks like a pastry porcupine."
That one a lot. I enjoyed that a lot. Like I said, I like that stuff. I like I think a lot of the Muppet sense of humor is here.
Yeah. And as you mentioned, we'll see that king character again. So I did feel kind of nostalgic when he was on, but looking at the thing as a whole, it didn't come together like a lot of the rest of their stuff would.
Again, this was unaired, so it's kind of cool that we even are able to watch it. You know, like there's something people didn't see. This isn't part of his story in a way, right? I mean, he made it, but like as far as the general public goes, this wasn't. It wasn't like, ooh, Tinker D led into this. No, this never aired. They went to Atlanta for 2 weeks or whatever, and they shot this thing, and then it didn't do anything. Just like so many pilots, it just faded away. And we like to think of people who like Henson, who are our heroes, and think that everything they touch turned to gold. And as we're going to see, he struggles a while, as brilliant as he is and as good as he is, and people acknowledge his talent. He struggles a while to get the type of show on the air that he wants.
He never really stops struggling when you think about it.
But isn't that, would you say that comes sometimes with someone who is a genius ahead of the curve, that's sometimes just a curse they have?
Me getting into my thoughts on the word genius would be a long tangent and rant, but I do think that there is a hunger there, especially if it's something that's related to a particular type of craft or performance, that keeps you wanting to reach for more.
And I also think, I think you're absolutely correct, but I also think that innovation and that wanting to do new things is also alienating, because television and movie executives tend to be conservative. And I don't mean their voting record, although some of them.
It's a business. You want a return on investment.
And they tend to be a little behind if something is too different or too out there. Because what happened to Henson throughout the entire 60s and a good chunk of the 70s was every executives went, yeah, but puppets are for kids. He could not get through their heads that puppets weren't only for kids. And he's going to have that battle for 2 decades, trying to convince people that grown-ups or at least families can enjoy a puppet show. And so when he makes, now Tales of Tinker D was created as a children's program, but I just think we're going to see him time and time again have these ideas that are just a step ahead, maybe, or 2 or 3 steps ahead of what the people who make the decisions want. Again, for this half-hour TV special, like we noted with Sam and Friends, it's self-contained. There are, other than his legs as the monster, we are in a Muppet world. I don't know. I have a soft spot for this one, I guess partially because I had never seen it, and I thought it was very funny, and it made my girls laugh, so I like that. And I also found it interesting that I don't think I'd ever seen anybody dress up as Santa Claus in a non-Christmas special.
That was a clever tip.
I just like the idea of a fantasy world where they're like, yeah, Santa Claus is coming too. I didn't invite Santa Claus. It feels, and again, they didn't spend years, but they may have spent a lot of time working on the script, but it does feel like the script was secondary.
That's something that with some of Jim's more experimental work, I think we're going to see pretty often. Not that the script isn't important, but he is going to be more concerned with immersion, or I guess immersion first and foremost. Yeah,
I mean we're getting to the era now where we have Jerry Jewell, who becomes the writer and the voice of the Muppets for decades to come, and he finds out along the way that his real talent is writing, and so Jim. I can't remember. I'm sure he has writing credits on stuff. I think Dark Crystal he does. But for a lot of it, he's just content to be the creator up front and let Jerry run the ship as far as the stories. You know, we're starting to see that here. This is the first thing that him and Jerry wrote together that was produced. I don't know. I find it to be, again, like we talked about with Sam and Friends, it's kind of a relic. I don't know. You're not going to find it. You have to look for it. You know, it's on YouTube, so you can find it. But it's not going to be on any box sets anytime soon. I don't know. It's I find it's an interesting little piece. The puppeteering though, the performances are still really good.
Oh yeah, no, that's absolutely solid.
Yeah.
And the comedic timing, like even with the repeat joke, it was very sharp. It just on a meta level, it didn't cohere.
I do wonder what the series would have been. Like what kind of stories were they telling? Because this is a fairy tale story that really doesn't have a moral to it. Doesn't really have a lesson. Doesn't really come together in any kind of meaningful way. You know, other than the bad guy gets her comeuppance.
Mm.
It does have one of my favorite things. The king orders like 500 peanut butter sandwiches for the party, which again, come on, dude, peanut butter sandwiches for your daughter's birthday party. And he ends up getting 67,000. And at the end, as part of the witch's punishment for, I don't know, she didn't even really, at the end of the day, doesn't even really do anything wrong.
She throws the princess in a closet and tries to like freeze her, I think, or petrify her.
She does freeze her for a minute. That's an entire storyline. She was punished and told she must sit in the dungeon and eat all the peanut butter sandwiches. And at the end, it leads me to my favorite Kermit bit in the whole thing.
And so the witch was overthrown. She cried and screamed and muttered. But to this day in a dungeon cold, she's caged and peanut buttered. Caged and peanut buttered.
I think my favorite part in this is Kermit, though.
Yeah.
I love bad. Like I said, I love a good, bad stretched rhyme.
Mm.
A historical note: he is wearing a collar in this for the first time.
But he still wasn't a frog at this point, though.
No, it was like a jester's collar. Yeah. And from backstage information or pictures, it was orange, which you obviously can't tell in the black and white show. But it was orange. So he wasn't quite there, but it's a step. 2 years later, in 1964, after Tales of Tinkerbell didn't go, Henson tried it again. And he made a show called The Land of Tinkerbell, which was he only created a pilot. Jerry Jewell wrote up 10 plot lines and a few scripts. And it was taped in one day in August of 1964, called The Land of Tinkerbell. And again, it brings back King Goshposh. And I think that's the only one.
That is the only recurring, because there are 3 characters in the entire piece. There's the watch repairman, his dog, and the king. Yeah, there's Daryl, who's a human being, Rufus, yes, and then King Goshposh. And this story is even thinner. With this, and I guess with some of the later, or not later commercials, but the earlier Elf commercials, it did feel kind of like they were pulling their punches. Because we discussed last episode how Jim really likes to either end with an explosion or someone getting eaten. And this just sort of trails off.
This is Rufus. He's a sheepdog.
I am?
Well, aren't you?
I've never seen a sheep in my life.
Well, you don't have to see sheep to be a sheepdog.
Matter of fact, I'm afraid of sheeps.
You're afraid of what?
I'm afraid of sheeps.
No, you're not afraid of sheeps. You're afraid of sheep.
Well, sure I am, because they're very unfriendly animals, sheeps are.
No, sheep. Sheep are very unfriendly animals.
You've noticed it, too. Are you afraid of sheeps, too?
Yeah.
We're both afraid of sheeps. We're sort of sheepish, actually.
Well, never mind.
Because it's more focused than Tales of the Tinkerbell was.
Yeah, it's only 14 minutes long.
And you have 2 central conflicts that are sort of related one after the other. One, the dog feels like it's underappreciated because it's not getting to do the fun jobs. And then there's the breaking of the watch. It just sort of coasts. There aren't really any peaks or valleys. This was designed to be a pilot for like a children's show, a daily children's show, though, like a afternoon show you'd watch after school. The only thing that makes it still Tinkerbell is King Goshposh. Like, the whole idea is there's this guy and his dog, and the guy is somehow the guardian, the gatekeeper to the land of Tinkerbell, which they never really explain what that means or how that works. And he's got a dog who, sounds a lot like Jim Henson playing a dog. And the king is coming because he wants his watch fixed, and it's a very expensive watch, and it's got little clockwork people in it. Yeah, a cannon. The cannon fires and all that stuff, and the king is very, and that's the other thing too. There's no and then eventually the dog breaks the watch, and then it has a very unsatisfying ending. Like, they set up, there's very little conflict in it. Like, the king is a pretty nice dude, and he's just asking for his watch to be fixed.
And then the dog breaks it, and on I think a very lazy play on words. The Daryl, the human, goes, well, you're a watchdog. You're a watchdog. You could fix a watch. And then he just decides to fix the watch. I felt that'd be very unsatisfying way to end it. Like there's no conflict resolution.
It's all pretty tame, all things considered.
But I do think this special is notable. One, it's fairly rare. It's not something that a lot of people have seen. Two, it is the first time that a human being, a human actor, is playing a character alongside other Muppets. Which is something that, of course, we'll see going forward in movies, especially where the Muppets exist in the human world, and the humans don't even think about the fact that they're puppets. The thing that sticks out to most people, because it's kind of the most famous still photo from it, is you have a man in a workshop with this Muppet dog, and man, it looks so close to Fraggle Rock.
It does. It definitely does, especially with like the workbench there.
Yeah, it could be. It's very, very Doc and Sprocket. But yes, this show, while I would say Tales of the Tinker-D at least takes that Muppet feel of being immersed in of crazy puns and the camera, and you're living in this world. This one is much more conventionally staged, right? Like it's just a puppet behind a desk. I hate to say it feels lazier, or at the very least it feels, all right, that didn't work. Let's try to dumb it down.
Yeah, I would say I wouldn't read this as laziness so much as a sort of trepidation, because he's trying to get a foot in, right?
Yeah, I mean, this was 2 years later, and so he had learned some things in between. We're going to talk in a minute about what he was doing kind of in between these two things. So, he had some experience, but it just, I don't know, it feels so blatantly an attempt to just get a kid's show on TV.
Yeah.
More in line with what was probably a more conventional kids show at the time. I loved watching this because I hadn't seen it, and because it's kind of hard to find. It does, you get to, they said more than anything, I can't get the image out of my head of Doc and Sprocket. I just can't. It's
not the worst image to have stuck in there. There's a lot of nostalgia attached to it.
I don't know. This piece, it's hard to talk a lot about this piece because it's literally just King brings his fancy watch, dog breaks watch, and at the end the dog looks like he's going to fix the watch.
I don't think he was. I think he was trying to hammer the watch. He might have actually made it worse. Well,
he said he was trying to take it. He said you got to take it apart first, which I thought was funny. So I guess the only thing we can then assume is that they were both beheaded after this, right?
Or they had to go and eat a bunch of peanut butter.
That is also possible.
Caged and peanut buttered.
The dog, Rufus, he will appear in a couple other things. He'll never have dialogue like this again. But Rufus Rufus. Despite being built after Rolf, Rufus looks more rudimentary than Rolf.
True. He's not as expressive. I think they tried... His eyes were smaller. They might have been trying to make him look more realistic, but it could have had the opposite effect.
Yeah, like he just... There was something other than Henson's voice coming out of him, and yeah, it's just a bunch of smart-ass jokes, and there are some funny ones, I think. I think when he breaks the watch, and he's like...
I think I'm going to take a walk.
Well, now, wait a minute.
I'm going to take a long walk.
It may not be that bad now.
I'm going to take a long walk.
Where are you going?
To Australia.
No, come back here. Come back here.
Not much to say about Land of Tinker-D other than I'm glad I saw it. And it's interesting to see these early attempts at making television, because as we know, he loved television so much.
Mm-hmm.
And he would eventually make a couple giant splashes in television. And so to see these early attempts they're almost like student films.
That's a good way to look at them, I think, because you can see those parts where he is refining aspects of his craft. For example, the mini cannons and the watch for Land of Tinker-D. It's a tiny effect. It seems like they might have just put some caps underneath something and then just got him to smoke, but it's something that he would continue to develop on.
But the way he describes this watch, right, is that it basically is like, it's a watch that does what one of those like big fancy clocks would do, like a bigger version, with the little mechanical people and hitting a gong and playing music and all that stuff. If you were making this today, though, he would show the watch.
Yeah.
He would actually, there would be a sequence where we would go into a stop motion or computer generated or animated or something sequence where we actually saw, I was actually watching it going like, aren't we going to see the watch? Are we going to see the little drummers and the soldiers and everything? And it's like, nope, they couldn't do that. They didn't have that. I think we've said all we can really say about the Land of Tinker D. I'm waiting for the third one, I guess. We'll have to wait for see how it finishes off. But they were two very different shows, and I did enjoy Tale of Tinker D better than Land of Tinker D, obviously, just because it at least finishes its story, which Land of Tinker D kind of doesn't.
Just sort of stops.
But I do like King. I do like the King. I do like King Goshbrush. I think he's a fun character.
The castle now is filled with joy. I bid farewell to thee until the next time I resume my tale of Tinker D. The tale of Tinker D.
In 1962, Purina Dog Food contracted Muppets Inc. for 7 television commercials. They would be short two-handers, like Wilkins and Wonkins, and Purina wanted new characters. Specifically, of course, dogs. Henson created the skinny and oddly bespectacled Baskerville the Hound, and his more low-key, floppy-eared buddy, Rolf. Baskerville was a pretty simple puppet, but Rolf was more complex. He was the first Muppet not built by Jim or Jane Henson. Instead, he delivered a sketch of the character to Burr Tillstrom's puppet builder, Don Saleen, whom Jim had met in Detroit. It was then up to Saleen to design and build Rolf, doing his best to capture the essence of the original sketch. A lot needs to be said about Don Saleen, and we will try to say as much as we can as the podcast goes along. But for brevity's sake, let's just say Jim was pleased with the puppet and immediately hired Saleen to be the head puppet builder for Muppets Inc. He is, other than Henson, the person most responsible for the look of the modern Muppet. We will talk about Don more later, I promise. The commercials themselves aren't especially notable. They feel like Muppet commercials, but they're safer and maybe even cute. And I counted 0 homicides, which, that's no good. Purina must have agreed and didn't order any more spots. And the dogs were shoved into a drawer and forgotten.
I tell you, Ralph, there's only one answer to this dog food problem. Asparagus. Tender, succulent asparagus.
Well, it may be all right for you, Baskerville, but I like Purina dog chow.
But asparagus is nourishing. It's got vitamins.
Purina dog chow is more nourishing. It's got all 43 vitamins and minerals a fella needs to make him feel all dog.
Ha! Asparagus tastes good.
Purina dog chow tastes better. It's flavor charged. Look, Baskerville, you go and enjoy your asparagus. It's past my chow time.
In 1963, Muppets Inc. and the Henson family moved to New York City. Jim and Jerry Jewell had already been going back and forth, doing semi-regular appearances on the Today Show. The Hensons rented an apartment on the East Side, a 7-minute walk from the new home of Muppets Inc., the top floor of a townhouse on East 53rd Street. If you were going to work in entertainment, you needed to be in one of 2 places, and Los Angeles was too far away from Deer for the Hensons to even consider it. The move to Manhattan was a big one. The Muppets were no longer just a couple of college kids, trying to make each other laugh at 11:25 every night. They were now a serious enterprise. The townhouse is where they set up the first of many Muppet workshops, where Don Saleen would build the puppets for whatever work came their way. And work was coming, just not the type Jim had planned. He had been rolling several ideas around in his head since Europe, including an elaborate production of Hansel and Gretel, and a nebulous idea for a variety show called Zookus, a zoo plus a circus, which never got any further than scribbles in his notebook. I'm not sure any of his plans involved a talking dog and a singing cowboy. Jimmy Dean was a country novelty singer who is, yes, the dude on the sausage packages. He'd had one hit song, and was coasting on it. He was a goofy, good-looking kid who could carry a tune and sounded like he came straight out of Texas. After doing a guest hosting gig on The Tonight Show, he was offered one of his own. They wanted the Muppets to come on as early guests, and thought Jimmy's aw shucks delivery might play well against Henson's zanier characters. They asked them to do the first 7 episodes of the show's run, just to try it out. The show was also shot in New York, the new home of Muppets Inc. Bernie Brillstein convinced Jim to take the job. Work was work, and he had an idea of which character would be up for the task.
So genius that I am, I hear Jimmy Dean, I hear country porch, and on the country porch happens to be a dog, which Jim happened to have.
In August of 1963, Jim and Rolf arrived for the first taping of the Jimmy Dean Show. By the end of the week, the chemistry between the dog and the star would be clear to everyone. Within months, he would be getting more fan mail than Dean himself. The singer's name was the one on the marquee, but people weren't tuning in for his warbly crooning. They were there for the dog.
Paragraph 9, subsection 27. Oh, blah. Well, if you pay what you're supposed to, you go to the poorhouse. And if you don't, you go to the big house.
Hey, Ralph. Ralph, are you complaining about the income tax?
You're darn right.
Look, it's only money. You can't take it with you.
I just wish they'd leave me enough to get there.
Now, I'm surprised at you. I am really surprised.
What?
Do you know that I consider it a privilege to pay my tax? Yes, sir. I'm happy to pay it. I can't wait until April the 15th comes around every year.
Folks, will you please look under your seats? Jimmy's lost his marbles.
Now, quit
So, being a live hand puppet, it takes 2 people to operate Ralph. One for the head and left arm, the operator, and one for the right, the assistant. They would watch a live feed of the show on a monitor on the floor at their feet, and adjust their performance based on what they saw, while also trying to coordinate with each other to make sure Rolf's right paw wasn't zigging when it was supposed to be zagging. It was a tight fit down there, with 2 performers practically on top of each other. Not a lot of room in an old hound dog for 2 adults to share. On the Purina commercials, Jerry Jewell had assisted Jim, working the right paw while the boss handled the rest. But by the time the show rolled around, Jewell had already started to focus more on the writing side of things in Muppet World. He was replaced by a fresh-out-of-high-school teenager from Oakland, who had enrolled at NYU but had no intention of attending class. Frank Osnowitz, although it was just Oz now, had come to New York, and he was ready to work.
So, Nick, we loved the Wilkins and Wilkins commercials, right? We talked about that last week.
Those hold up really well.
They do. They're real funny. These Purina commercials kind of follow the same template.
They don't, though. They follow there's not the same kind of antagonism that you would see in the Wilkins and Wilkins ones. They seem a lot more tame.
I mean, Baskerville's honestly just not that compelling of a character.
Yeah. He tried.
He does try. He does try. It's what's important to talk, now that we're talking about, we're not going to get too much into the Purina commercials because exactly that's what they really are. They're watered down versions of Muppets Inc. commercials. I think a big, but there are a couple important things. One, Rolf is, again, we're going kind of out of order. The Purina commercials were like 1962. So this is before Rufus. But Rolf was one of the first Muppets that was not abstract. That's an important thing to note. He's one of the first Muppets that was made to be like a thing that really exists and is that thing. If you think about all the Sam and Friends Muppets and things like that, there's not really direct, you don't have like, oh, look, this one's a bird or this one's an alligator. Like Kermit's not a frog yet. Kermit's just an amorphous sock. And so it is interesting in this case, they were hired by Purina, but they wanted dogs. And so they made 2 puppets that were distinctly dogs. The other thing to notice about Rolf before we take off talking about him is that he was built by Don Saleen, as we talked about before, who would end up becoming the guy who figured out what I would call the modern Muppet looked like. And this, what we think of as these kind of, like I said, the Rolfs and the Fozzies and the Piggies, these kind of, Kermit is a different beast. but these more kind of, I don't know what we call them, full-figured, weightier, maybe, was the way to put them.
Better realized? I don't know if that's fair.
They've got a weight to them. They feel like they look heavy. Rolf is a live hand puppet, and that is something that Henson definitely helped pioneer. What's his name? You see, this is how much of an impact it had on us. Rufus, Rufus, was also a live hand puppet. Yeah, there's not much to be said. You can check them out. I think they only made 7.
They didn't get renewed, so they would have had a very limited set.
And I think they hired Rolf I think Rolf got picked up for some commercials for other brands as well.
He was attached to IBM, wasn't he? Or was that later?
Yeah, I know he ended up doing some IBM meeting films. And he would show up and stuff a lot because, as we're about to talk about, he was the Muppets' first national star. Kermit the Frog is the symbol of the Muppets. It is Henson. The Henson logo has the little green collar on it. In Los Angeles on, God damn, now I'm going to miss it. I think it's on La Cienega. It's either on La Cienega or La Brea. And I say that, it's probably on Fairfax. But it's on La Cienega or La Brea. And there's the Henson Studios, which used to be Charlie Chaplin's studio. As you drive by it, you see this big statue of Kermit the Frog in the courtyard. Kermit is the symbol of the Muppets, but he wasn't their first star. While these commercials didn't make Rolf a star, this little country boy did.
But can you name an animal who is more loyal than a dog?
Yeah. Now, there you go. That's true. All right. Now, just take, for instance. There are 2 of us drowning in the middle of a stream.
Yeah.
Elizabeth Taylor and me. And you can only save one of us. Which one would it be?
You're right. A dog like me doesn't deserve a tail. But there are 9 million other dogs who do.
Yeah.
So, dogs of America, we're gonna fight to the finish.
Right. It's dog eat dog.
What a beastly thing to say.
I'm sorry.
But dogs of America, we must never give up.
Never give up.
Fight to the finish.
Fight to the finish.
Justice for us dogs.
Justice for us dogs.
Us dogs. Well, hello, Rover.
Did you know who Jimmy Dean was when we started this?
So, I think when I heard his name mentioned initially, I was thinking of James Dean, which I know was wrong. But outside of that, I'd heard of the Sausages, but I didn't have any familiarity with his music career or anything like that.
His music career wasn't really anything to write home about. But what I like about him, and now we're talking about the Jimmy Dean show, where Rolf was brought on, I believe, from what I remember, that Jimmy Dean actually had seen some Sam and Friends, had heard about them from some friends in Washington, and had actually specifically asked for them. But I don't think he expected the dog to be more popular than him.
Probably not.
But I'll say this: him and Henson have pretty good chemistry.
Oh, that holds up well today. I think of the things that we reviewed for this week, watching those segments was something that I was genuinely enjoying throughout. Rolf and Jimmy, with Jimmy being the straight man, was really solid. Not to mention Rolf's very interesting crush on Lassie that kept coming up.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of them available. I probably watched like 24 of the clips. There's more out there, but it's not necessary to watch them all. It is notable that this is the first thing that Henson and Jewell, they didn't write these. This stuff was all at the mercy of the writers for the Jimmy Dean show. Guys like Buddy Arnold and Will Glickman, who were old school, like they wrote for Milton Berle. It is all professional comedy writer dialogue. So it's kind of, which I will say excuses a few of the more dated kind of women in the kitchen references every once in a while. There's a couple of jokes at the expense of, like, I don't know, men who do ballet. I heard there's one that's kind of a little bit of a fruity joke, and again, I'm not saying that they would have been above making those jokes back in 1963, but they were definitely coming from this more hardscrabble group of comedy writers. But I think that comes across too. It's not necessarily Muppet humor.
It is and it isn't. Like, I can definitely see that Jim would have learned something from his time with these writers or with these writers' material, and maybe Jerry Joel did as well, because the comedic timing. We spoke to the chemistry just a second ago, but there's one clip in which the central conceit of it was that Rolf had messed up his bit, but you can tell that it's all pretty well constructed, and Jimmy Dean and Rolf keep going back and forth about how he's actually supposed to do the bit, and there's also the undercurrent about Rolf not necessarily liking what had been written for him, or Jimmy worrying that Rolf hadn't liked it. It's significantly tighter than we would have seen with Tinkerty.
Yes.
With either Tinkerty.
Yes.
And seeing where they end up going after this, it makes sense that they could have used this as a sort of a stepping stone to sort of solidifying that Muppet sense of humor. Because even if this wasn't written by the Muppet writers, it felt more like Muppet humor. Just because of like the rapid fire that wasn't entirely reliant on word association, you started seeing more character interactions.
Jewel and Henson both said that this is where they learned how to write television. They did the Jimmy Dean show for 3 years, and they also went on the road with him. And they both admitted that, yeah, this is where we learned how to write TV. You know, we didn't really know how to write television, and so they kind of got this boot camp from these really experienced television writers. You know, and there's nothing like an old school 1950s, 60s television writer. And I think they learned a lot. They didn't originally, Henson was not originally excited for the job. I don't know if he was ever super excited for the job. Bernie Brillstein, I listened to an interview with Bernie Brillstein where he was kind of like, it was a gig, you know? But it turned into so much more. And Bernie Brillstein, it's kind of funny. Everything I read about Jimmy Dean is about how affable he was and how humble he was and how him and Jim got along. But then I saw an interview with Brillstein where he just laid into Jimmy Dean.
Oh, wow.
And said he was miserable to work with and really difficult. And like, it was so, you know, it goes to show, I've said it for years back when I worked in Hollywood, for every famous person has someone who thinks they're the best person in the world and someone who thinks they're a monster. Mm-hmm. It is weird. It is interesting watching this, thinking that this isn't necessarily their work. I mean, it is in that they learned performance. What they were able to do was establish for 3 years, Rolf was on this show. Basically every episode, showing up as Jimmy's old buddy Rolf. Henson became an exceptional performer during this time. I think this is where his acting chops as a puppeteer really came into focus. Because he got to play, like Vincent D'Onofrio on Daredevil, right? Mm-hmm. Was able to create a more compelling version of the Kingpin than anyone else has ever been able to do because he had time. I would say the same thing with on the TV show Hannibal.
I'm not familiar with that one, but
it's a great show, and I actually think it's a more compelling vision than even Anthony Hopkins' version. In his own way, Jim got to play Rolf for 3 years, playing against the same person. He got to develop a character. There were arcs, like you said. He's got a crush on Lassie. Eventually, Lassie came on the show. You know, he learned how to develop a character and develop a rapport with someone. And while yes, it was scripted, and a lot of the things that one of the great talents of comedy writers like that is to make you feel like it's improv. But if you look through the footage, there are some genuine moments where Henson adds a line or flubs a line that just cracks Jimmy up.
He did break pretty often.
Yeah. Well, he's not really an actor. You know, he's a cowboy singer. You know, he had a novelty hit or two.
It also fit into the character that he was portraying that he would do that. To go back to the comment about Brillstein's perspective on Jimmy Dean versus what other people's might have been, there was a genuine rapport there, and I think that, like, if you and I are talking and I crack a joke that I probably shouldn't crack on any sort of recorded medium, I'm probably going to get a begrudging laugh out of you.
Right.
I might also just get a weird look, but there's like a non-zero chance that I'll say something and deliver it in such a way that you won't be happy that you're laughing, but you're still going to laugh. I think that might have sold the relationship all the more, which isn't something that a lot of comedians can or really should do, but in this particular case, it felt right.
The other thing I think that this really brought out, though, was, and you hit on this last week, is the idea that when people are with a Muppet, they are not with the puppeteer. They genuinely believe that they are interacting, conversing, and having a relationship with that Muppet, right? And, anyone who knows me knows I'm a Star Wars fan. I think one of the most important performances in all of Star Wars is Mark Hamill believing in Yoda.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think The Empire Strikes Back works if Mark Hamill wasn't able to completely believe in that character. And I think in this, Jimmy Dean is not talking to Jim Henson. He is talking to Rolf. He believes in Rolf. He said so in interviews that like he just completely bought in to this character. And the more I hear that story, the more I think maybe it's not the actors, maybe it's just the Muppets.
There's also something to consider in that you've got two people who are behind the same face. And I don't have anything particularly eloquent to say about this, but I wonder how that plays into a dynamic where it's much easier to just recognize that maybe Jim and Frank are underneath there, but Jim and Frank are both Rolf. So I can just say Rolf, and whoever needs to respond is going to respond.
It's good that you mentioned that, because we're here. This is only our second episode, but as we got to this, Frank Oz has joined the party now. The contribution that Frank is about to make, Frank Oz was, in the opinion of the old school Muppet people, Frank Oz was above and away the most gifted puppeteer of his generation. And here we are, ground floor, and all he's doing right now is he's playing the right hand of a dog. I believe that they are the greatest comedy duo in the history of entertainment. Oz and Henson. Not Piggy and Kermit, not Rolf. Henson and Oz are the best comedy duo in history. And what I love about this stuff is this is the beginning of it.
Mm.
This is where they're learning to work together. Frank is like 19 in this. He is 18. He's just out of high school. He's so young. And actually, if you read about him, he was kind of angry and grumpy too. He was kind of the grumpy emo kid. So I love watching this early Rolf stuff because I know underneath there, the stuff's very funny. I guess there's a joke here or there that you're like, yeah, that's the 60s for you. But I love this stuff because I know who's under that dog. And what is happening underneath there is that this relationship is being forged between these two men that for the next 25 plus years are going to become something very special together. And I'm excited that Frank Oz is in our story now. I don't think people quite grasp it, nor should they, to be fair. When you're watching Rolf or The Swedish Chef or something, you should just be concentrating on what they're doing, what they're saying in the comedy. But if you can imagine just for a second, the physical position that in this case, two grown men have to be in to operate this puppet. To stand with your arm straight up over your head. Try doing that for a minute, let alone for a 6-minute sketch, right? And then the fact that one of them is independently controlling one of the arms. I don't know. I the technical aspect of performing a puppet like Rolf amazes me.
Oh, they were holding those positions for hours, I imagine, just to get used to it. And I imagine if it was scripted, they had rehearsals in order for them to get everything lined up with Jimmy Dean.
And while dealing with that, bringing a fully realized character to life. I can't help but like Jimmy Dean watching these. I don't know what he said. Conflicting opinions of what he was like in real life, but he's willing to make fun of himself. Like half of the jokes between him and Rolf are Rolf making fun of Jimmy's talent or lack thereof.
Yeah, it was like either his music career or the size of his ears for a lot of them.
Yeah, I didn't put any clips on here of him making fun of the size of his ears because it doesn't make sense. But there are a lot of jokes about Jimmy Dean's ears because he had real big ears. He's non-threatening, that's for sure. But you can hear in these clips, you can hear in these exchanges that you're right. It reflects what the Muppets are going to be a little bit. I believe it informs and it instructed them. The sense of humor, I think, is different, but the craft is what they're learning. Mm-hmm. How to set up jokes and things like that in a way that, like I said, while I thought Tale of Tinker was funny, this is like genuine muscular comedy writing. Mm-hmm. It's tight and it's professional. And the one thing that they were not, that the Muppets were not at this point, was professional. Even though they were making money, even though they had their own TV show, even though they were making a lot of money from commercials, I still would not call them professionals at that point. And, you know, it was 3 years with Jimmy Dean. Now, I don't know if any resentment came of it, but it wasn't very long before Rolf started getting more fan mail than Jimmy. And he became the show. And I don't think he was ever on it for more than like was it like 7 to 10 minutes or something like that per episode?
Yeah. It was like somewhere between 5 and 10, I think.
But I'll tell you this, YouTube is not flooded with clips from the rest of the episodes. You can find full episodes of the Jimmy Dean Show. That's not a problem. And I believe there were like some DVD box sets back in the day or whatever. But if you just type like Jimmy Dean Show, all you're mostly going to find are clips of Rolf. And you're not going to find, you know, and no one's going to really care, you know, who that Cher sang in the second, you know, in the third act or something. Mm. I was a little reticent to talk about Jimmy Dean just because I was like, oh, it's just, but the more I read about it, the more I realized what a big step this was. I've always thought of Kermit as the Muppet, and he must have been the ground zero Muppet, you know, and while he predates Rolf, I think a combination of Don Celine's brilliant design. I don't think we can give Celine enough credit for what a wonderful puppet Rolf is. And then you also have Henson coming into his own as a performer because he's being forced to act. Remember, this is a man who for years on his own show didn't want to use his voice. But Jim has to perform. He had to learn to interact. He had to learn all these things. And he's learning to work with Frank Oz at the same time. He's learning how to write. These shows, this 3 years on the Jimmy Dean Show, are exceptionally important in the development of the Muppets. And I hadn't really thought about it until I really dug into it. And they're funny.
Dogs of America protest. For people, there's a Mother's Day and there's a Father's Day. Well, why isn't there a Dog Day? Look in this almanac here. There's a day for Columbus. There's a day for George Washington. Why, next week there's even a day for an April Fool. Got here a week early.
Yeah, no, it was a joy to watch.
Some of it's very timely of the day. I mean, I love the one where Rolf's got his down with people. He's got a sign down with people. They had
the cat episode where I'm pretty sure the cat actually scratched Rolf.
Yeah. Well, and the one where Rolf thinks he's a cat.
Yeah. Or he finds out that he's a cow.
Yeah. Yes. I don't know. I didn't expect to like this stuff. And it's very funny. I caught early on when I was watching it, there was one episode where they made some kind of joke about women being in the kitchen. And then
there was a female presidential candidate, I think.
Yeah, which doesn't hold up very well. One thing I did want to bring up before we go, I didn't mention it before because we went over the Purina commercials so fast because, like we said, they're just not interesting, is that apparently Purina did offer Jim $100,000 to buy Rolf. And Bernie Brillstein jumped at it. And Jim immediately shut it down and said words that Brillstein has repeated often and that Brillstein learned was the rule when dealing with Jim Henson, which is never sell anything I own. And that's going to be something that we're going to see with Jim, that holding on to his property, holding on to his creations is going to be of utmost importance to him.
Yeah, and I want to give Brillstein a lot of credit for trusting Jim with that, too. So you have to imagine a lot of other agents would have just pushed really hard.
Yeah, Brillstein, he's a fascinating He's a fascinating cat, and he's going to come into the story more later. We'll talk about him some more, I'm sure. He was very instrumental. He was Jim's agent for the rest of his life. One of the things we're doing right now is we're following Jim Henson as Danny Ocean as he's putting together his team. And now we've got, so far, just to keep track, we've got Don Saline, master puppet builder. We've got Jerry Jewell, who, yes, starts off as a puppeteer, but is going to be the writer of the Muppets. And now we have Frank Oz. And over the next couple of episodes, we're going to meet 2 or 3 more people that are going to form what anyone would consider the core of the Muppets. I think it's like 6 people that are going to be his, and yes, it's true, his men, his guys, they're all male, his guys for the next 20 years. With the Jimmy Dean Show, the Muppets had found real success. Rolf, like Kukla, Ollie, Charlie McCarthy, and other beloved puppets before him, had moved beyond the cloth and stitches that gave him form, beyond the men giving him motion and voice. He was alive, he was a person, and he was a damn TV star. Things couldn't get much better. The Muppets were now in big-time show business, entertaining millions every night. But what Jim Henson really wanted to be doing was making an avant-garde short film about the passage of time.
Next week, things get weird.
Yeah, they really do. They get kind of weird. Anyway, thank you for listening. lunaticdaring.com, at lunaticdaring on all your social media platforms. I'm Chad.
I'm Nick.
And we'll talk to you next time. Bye. A Feat of Lunatic Daring is written and produced by Chad J. Shonk and hosted by Chad J. Shonk and Nicholas Jackson. Music by Seth Podowitz. And a proud production of
Antithesis.